You were the first generation to raise yourselves. You walked home alone to empty houses, cooked your own microwave dinners, and solved your own problems long before your parents walked through the door. So when society asks why you don't clap for every new trend or panic over every new crisis, it's not because you're numb. It's because you've already seen the movie. You know how it ends, and you learned decades ago that the only person coming to save you is you. If you were born between 1965 and 1980, this isn't a personality flaw. It's your operating system. And the world has spent decades misunderstanding you because of it. We rarely talk about Gen X in cultural conversations. Boomers get the blame. Millennials get the think pieces. Gen Z gets the TikToks. But Gen X? You're the forgotten middle child of generations, sandwiched between the loud optimism of your parents and the loud anxiety of your kids. And maybe that's exactly how you like it. Because being forgotten means being left alone. And being left alone means no one's asking you to perform joy you don't feel. For years, you might have thought your cynicism was a defect, that your refusal to join the hype was just bitterness, that your emotional distance made you cold. Society told you that optimism is virtuous, that community requires constant engagement, that if you're not posting, sharing, celebrating, you're somehow checked out of life. But here's the truth they won't tell you. Your skepticism wasn't learned in adulthood. It was baked into your childhood. And it might be the most rational response to the world you grew up in. Let's go back. Gen X was the first generation of latchkey kids, children who came home to empty houses because both parents were working, or one parent was gone entirely. Divorce rates spiked in the 70s and 80s. You watched your friends' families fall apart. You learned early that adults don't always keep their promises, that institutions, schools, churches, corporations, don't protect you. You were told you could be anything, and then you graduated into recessions. You were raised on the idea of the American dream, and then you watched it become unaffordable. So you stopped believing the hype. Not because you were lazy, but because you were paying attention. Here's where psychology gets interesting. There's a concept called earned secure attachment versus natural secure attachment. Natural secure attachment happens when you grow up in a stable environment. Your needs are met, you trust people, you expect good things. But earned secure attachment? That's when you grow up in chaos and you still figure out how to function, not by denying reality, but by seeing it clearly. You don't trust blindly, you trust selectively. You don't hope recklessly, you hope strategically. Gen X doesn't suffer from cynicism. You suffer from pattern recognition, and pattern recognition, in an unpredictable world, is a survival skill. Let's differentiate two things that get confused constantly: cynicism versus realism. Cynicism says nothing will ever work, so why try? Realism says most things don't work the way they're advertised, so let's adjust expectations and try anyway. Cynicism is passive, realism is active. And Gen X? You're not cynics. You're realists who got mislabeled because your realism makes people uncomfortable. You don't clap for every new app, every political promise, every corporate rebrand. Not because you're joyless, but because you remember when New Coke failed, when AOL was supposed to change everything, when every election was supposed to fix everything. You've seen this movie before, and you know how it ends. But here's what makes this fascinating. That emotional distance you've been shamed for, that refusal to get swept up in collective euphoria, it's not apathy. It's emotional economy. You learned early that energy is finite, that attention is currency, that if you spend your enthusiasm on every passing trend, you'll have nothing left for the things that actually matter. And this is where Gen X becomes quietly powerful. Because while everyone else is burning out on outrage and inspiration fatigue, you're still standing. You didn't invest in hype, so you didn't crash when the hype died. You didn't build your identity around a movement, so you didn't fall apart when the movement fractured. You kept your head down, did the work, and survived. Not because you're tough, but because you're efficient. This is your superpower. You know how to care without performing care. You know how to show up without needing applause. You're the friend who doesn't post about the birthday party but actually remembers to bring the gift. You're the coworker who doesn't announce their contributions in meetings but somehow keeps the whole operation running. You're the parent who doesn't brag about their kid's achievements but makes sure their kid feels seen. You operate on a different frequency. And in a world obsessed with visibility, your quiet competence gets mistaken for detachment. Think of it this way. Gen X is the emotional equivalent of dark matter. Scientists know dark matter exists because of the effects it has on everything around it, even though you can't see it directly. You hold families together. You keep companies functional. You show up when it matters. But you don't need the spotlight to prove it. And that confuses people. Because we live in a culture that equates silence with absence. But you know better. You know that the loudest people in the room are often the least effective. But here's the trap nobody sees coming. And this is where Gen X needs to be careful. Because emotional independence can harden into emotional isolation. Because skepticism can become a reflex so strong that you stop letting good things in. There's a difference between protecting yourself and barricading yourself. And if you're not careful, the walls you built to survive your childhood become the walls that keep you lonely in adulthood. Here's the paradox. You learned early not to expect too much from people, and that skill saved you. But now, the people in your life might think you don't need them. Your kids might think you're fine without affection. Your partner might think you're content with distance. Not because they're abandoning you, but because you've gotten so good at not asking for anything that they assume you don't want anything. And here's the other side of the paradox. While Gen X was learning to be self-sufficient, younger generations were learning to be vulnerable. Millennials and Gen Z talk about their feelings constantly. They overshare. They perform their pain. And Gen X looks at that and thinks it's weakness. But sometimes, it's connection. Sometimes saying, "I'm struggling" out loud is how people find each other. And if you never say it, people assume you're not struggling. They assume you're okay, even when you're not. So the hidden work for Gen X isn't learning to be tougher. You're already tough. The hidden work is learning that asking for help doesn't undo everything you've built. That letting someone see you care deeply doesn't make you weak. That optimism, in small doses, isn't naive. It's just another tool in the box. Because here's the truth. The world needs your realism. We need people who don't fall for every scam, every trend, every promise. We need people who remember history, who ask hard questions, who don't mistake noise for substance. But the world also needs you to know that it's okay to want things, to hope for things, to let people in even when it's scary. You don't have to perform enthusiasm you don't feel. But you also don't have to perform indifference you don't mean. You're allowed to care. You're allowed to be disappointed. You're allowed to want more, not because you're ungrateful, but because you're human. And maybe the real secret psychology of Gen X is this. You've spent your whole life being told you're too detached, too cynical, too hard to read. But the truth is, you're not hard to read. You're just written in a language most people don't speak anymore. A language of loyalty over loudness, competence over charisma, presence over performance. And if this hit home, if you felt seen for even a moment, maybe it's time to stop apologizing for who you are. Maybe it's time to recognize that your skepticism is wisdom, your distance is discernment, and your refusal to get swept up in every wave isn't apathy, it's sovereignty. You're not broken. You're just operating on a frequency the world forgot how to tune into. And that's okay, because the people who matter, they'll find the dial.